Good Girl Confessional. I'm your host, Sandy Lowries, and our latest podcast. We're really thrilled to have had a wonderful author, Susan Francis, on the podcast. Susan Francis has written this book, The Love That Remains, which is an incredibly raw and honest memoir that I think a lot of people are going to really love. I will put up links obviously to where you can follow Susan, but she is Susan Francis 29 on Instagram, and you can follow her Susan Francis Writer on Facebook. Susan has shared this kind of extraordinary chapter of her life. She spent almost, or maybe over 20 years searching for her biological parents because she had actually been adopted at birth. And in the course of that part of her life, she actually met the love of her life. She did so as a woman beyond 40, finds the love of her life, and the two of them decide they're actually going to go on this incredible journey and go and live overseas. And then extraordinary events take place which were completely unforeseen. This is a true memoir. So I was really so thrilled to actually meet Susan via video for our podcast. Obviously in these crazy times of the coronavirus, that's the only way to go right now. But we did share gin, and we had an amazing conversation about her life and her journey and how she came to write this book. So please do listen to her. This podcast is available obviously on Spotify, on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts, on Spreaker, and everywhere else where you listen to your favourite podcasts. We would love it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel and definitely follow along on our Facebook and Instagram pages. We really appreciate it. In these unprecedented times of coronavirus, I wanted to personally say that I'm sending my love and a big bloody virtual hug out to everyone because I can't touch you anymore. But I wanted to say, stay well, please social distance, please self-isolate, stay indoors unless you absolutely have to go out. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and sending you so much love. Please listen in to Susan Francis. Susan, thank you for being so extraordinary and for coming on the podcast. I hope everyone enjoys it. Bye. It's recording. Hello and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional. Susan Francis, hello.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here. I'm really, really happy to be here.
I'm so thrilled to have you. And like always, and I talk about everything on the podcast, of course, because we're two chicks trying to use technology.
It didn't work, did it?
It didn't work.
No.
But now it's working. Now it's working.
Kind of. Better than it was anyway.
So, Susan Francis, you amazing, beautiful human, you have written this extraordinary memoir. Are you sick of looking at that? I don't think you would ever get sick of looking at that cover.
No, I've said before, I look at the cover and I think, who is Susan Francis? So I still can't link that book with what I did. It's almost a separate thing. It's extraordinary.
It's extraordinary. So I should say that for those who are watching this for the very first time, you have written this extraordinary memoir, which is a huge chapter of your life, called The Love That Remains. It is a beautiful, heartfelt, raw story. And I would highly recommend people rush out, buy this book and read it. I think it's truly beautiful. But I'm going to allow you throughout the podcast to talk about it in your own words and to tell your story in your own words, because this is quite an extraordinary read. First of all, cheers. We did confirm that we're both gin drinkers and we are drinking gin.
Cheers to you.
Cheers. And I was saying that I'm drinking 4 Pillars gin, which is a Victorian gin. I've got a little bit of lemon and some rosemary, and you've got what's going on in yours?
I have a Tanqueray Sevilla, so Seville. Very, very nice Tanqueray made in Spain. So beautiful, with all the memories and the flavours that Spanish gin holds.
And yum, who doesn't love good gin, right?
Yeah, and you know, in Spain, just going off talking about gin. In Spain, they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kinds of gin. and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mixers to go with them. And when you go to Spain, they give you a gin as cheap as a Coca-Cola.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. You have to love Europe, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Were you like a mad gin fan prior to your...
No, I wasn't.
Wow.
Because we would go out so much and it was so hot and the food was delicious, but you couldn't eat without drinking because, in fact, you had a drink and the food came with it. So the drink came first. And in Granada, the tapas is free if you buy a drink. So the drink had to come first. And I soon realised that Coca-Cola or orange juice was as cheap as a gin. And so, yeah, I kind of quickly moved to gin.
Well, there's nothing for it. Seriously, Susan, if you can get... I'd prefer gin over Coca-Cola any day.
So would I. In fact, I can't remember the last time I had a Coca-Cola. I had Coca-Cola.
I don't actually do Coke, so yeah. So one of the really gorgeous moments for me in reading your book, and I'm going to get you to tell everybody what this story is all about in a minute, but getting back to the gin, one of the things was before I'd like really gotten into it, and I'm reading like your bio and I'm reading that you like gin and I'm thinking, already I knew that I loved you. I thought you were amazing, but seriously, the book is sublime. It is truly written from, I feel like, from your heart. I don't know how anyone could not tell their own memoir unless it was done that way, but it is a really beautiful book and not what I was expecting, which was kind of really lovely too. It was a revelation.
Yeah, a few people have said to me that it's not what they're expecting. Many people have said that, and I'm not quite sure what people expected. I don't know if it was the twist at the end that changed it, or I'm not quite sure, but many people have said it's not what they expected, and that's great. That's good.
I think it is.
Yeah.
So let's talk about you. Let's talk about you and this extraordinary journey. Are you, like, I don't know, is it difficult still to talk about it?
Well, I actually thought that I would be all right talking about it once I'd written it. And it's been 5 years now that Wayne has passed away. It'll be 5 years in June.
Wow, yeah.
And so I thought I would be all right about it. But once I started doing promotion, you can't tell it. I can't tell it without feeling it. And I do often get upset when I'm telling parts of it. And there's no way around that. It just is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's start, I guess, where the book begins, which is really interesting, which starts with this really... There's two stories going on here, really, isn't there? And not that I want to give everything away to people who might not yet have read this. I think when I put a shout out about the book and how much I loved it, I actually said for anyone who is searching for their biological place in the world, this completely would make sense to them. And so do you want to take us back to so you've grown up with adoptive parents?
Yeah, so my parents couldn't have children, and my father had had cancer at quite a young age, which had made him infertile. And my mother had married him at a very young age. She was 18 when she left home. And they both came from unhappy homes. My father had been born illegitimately and never knew his own father. And my mother, her younger brother had died from meningitis when he was 5. She was the only other child, and her mother never recovered from that. So they'd both grown up really without a family. So to my mother, it was really, really important that she had children, and then Dad couldn't have children. So they decided to adopt. And in the day, there was such a thing called private adoption, which meant they literally went to the doctor's office one Saturday morning and they had a reference from their employers, and the doctor like literally just handed me over and said, here's the baby and off you go.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so different and it's really hard to believe, but it was actually a thing. I've heard of other people who were privately adopted. So as long as you had a good job and you had a reference and you needed a baby, you got one.
We'll find one for you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and we must like kind of preface that with, it was a time when it was not, according to society, it wasn't okay to be a single mother.
No.
Especially a young girl, and a lot of mums who gave up their babies or had no choice at the time, their babies were taken from them.
That's exactly right.
And
yeah, and that was forced adoption. Yeah. And I can't imagine that trauma. Having a child of my own, I can't imagine what that must have been like. But that wasn't the case with my mother. It was very different with my mother. But it is important that both sides of the story are told. And my adoption story is my adoption story on its own. It's not everybody's adoption story. And that's important to say as well, because so many birth mothers suffered. It wasn't just children who were adopted out that suffered.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. And so with you, in terms of a private adoption, at some point you decide that you really wanted to find out biologically where you'd come from. So you knew that your adoptive parents were amazing people and were doing a great job. Both you and your brother are adopted.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you made a conscious decision to actually, I suppose, was there a point though where records just became available and that probably opened the door?
Yeah, so I think it was 1993, they finally said, if you're adopted, you can actually access your original birth certificate. And at that point, my adopted father was dying and I had my son, who was only very small. So it was a really pivotal point in my life, caught between death and life. And often they say that people who are adopted, what is the motivation to start searching is if they have a child or if one of their parents die. That's often the motivation. But for me, it occurred at the same time as the records finally became available. So I was able to see my original birth certificate, not the one that had been created for me. And from that original birth certificate, I could see when my natural mother had been born and what her surname was. And that's what allowed me to start looking and start searching.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, that in and of itself must have been such a huge journey.
A 20-year journey. It took me 20 years to find her and speak to her and also find my father and speak to him. So that took 20 years and it was a very complicated and winding road to find out where I came from.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, and because, I mean, I will just ask you all these questions because I want people to go out and read the book. So I don't want to just give everything away. I think it would be fair, do you think, to say that what you found in that journey was not what you were expecting?
Absolutely fair. And more than fair.
Yeah.
I had no idea, I really didn't know. I didn't know what I was going to find, but what I found is not anything that I could have imagined. And a lot of people have said to me, if this wasn't a true story and people read it as a fiction, they would say, no, this is too hard to believe. This lady's having us on. You know, and it comes back to that cliche that truth is stranger than fiction. And one of the reasons people said to me, why didn't you make it a story? Why didn't you base a fiction story on what had really happened? But I felt the reason I started writing this story was to write myself, my own identity, back into the world. It was kept from me for so long, willfully kept from me, that I decided that I would take my identity and put it on the page and own it and put myself out there. This is me. Like, it's a literal thing. Because I didn't have an identity. And so now that I have one, it has to be owned and it has to be written down, and this is me. So it's more than just a metaphorical journey, if that makes sense to you. Yeah,
it absolutely does. And I think that one of the beautiful things that you write, you know, on the cover of the book, even, I think it's on here, that, yes, how could I write about the importance of truth and then not tell the whole truth myself?
Exactly. So people say towards the end of the book, there's a specific health issue that I discuss. And so many people said to me, God, you put that in. How could you have put that in?
I love that you did. I love that you did. For me, every part of this book was so authentic and brilliant, and clearly you were living it and reliving it when you were writing the book, right? I thought it was just those were those small trees that you show that shouldn't be that big a deal in a way.
I agree.
Right?
Yep.
And yet, you know, I'm not surprised you got that reaction. I was actually reading, when I was reading it for the first, I was like, I guarantee people are going to be freaking out about.
Yep. And they are, and they do. And but someone said to me very nicely today that Elizabeth Gilbert was the one who said, there's a certain age when a woman no longer feels shame. And that's the way I feel. This is me. And whatever judgments people are going to make, I'm actually okay about it.
Which I think is such a beautiful, beautiful way to live your life. And I think that as women, we struggle, right? That's a life journey to get there. So, you know, you've lived like this life of this journey of trying to find biological parents, but in no way are you dismissing your beautiful adoptive parents.
Oh, God, no.
No. And I mean, that's what's so beautiful as well. That really comes through, this genuine love and warmth that you feel for your parents. And then in seeking to find the biological parents, that is in no way diminished. But this is also a love story, Susan.
And this is the bit where I generally cry.
All right, have some gin.
Yes.
We'll have a sip of gin. Because, okay. So, let's paint a picture. So you're a school teacher. You were a school teacher. You were, and loving that.
Loving it, but it was hard. It was a hard job because life in the Central West is very difficult for a lot of people, a lot of children. And I was senior at my school, and with a lot of compassion. And so it can put you in difficult positions, and it can mean that you're working very long hours. And I felt that I had nothing else other than my teaching, my work. So, you know, and travelling backwards and forwards between school and Dubbo, and that was nearly an hour's drive there and then an hour back along country roads. So it was becoming, you know, I was imagining myself at 65 still living in my tiny little house in Dubbo and still teaching and still being torn apart by some of the stories, some of the lives that I was dealing with. Yeah.
And that really comes through in the book as well, that sense of compassion that you carry with you. I'd imagine, look, I take my hat off to all teachers, you know, having raised 3 children myself. I think I honestly, I don't think that teachers are revered enough. They should be more revered. It's extraordinary. So at this stage, so you're teaching and you have a son.
And my son, Jono, by this stage has graduated from the police force and is working in Dubbo with his beautiful girlfriend, Jamie, who was also a police officer. And I can't remember who suggested that I go online. I think it was the girl that I travelled with, Lyndall. She was another teacher and we would travel out to Dubbo together. And it was hilarious because we both went online, and in that car trip we would show each other who had liked us and who hadn't liked us, and it was very funny, very, very, very funny.
Can I say that I love that, Susan, because in 2013 when I first started the Good Girl Confessional, and its very first incarnation was a blog, and I was a suddenly single and divorced single mother at 41, thinking, and I'd been in this relationship for nearly 18 years, thinking, how am I ever going to meet someone? Looking back, that's laughable because I was only 41. But every woman who goes through that after, whatever time stage of our life, we go through this and think, how am I, of all people, going to do this? But so many of my gorgeous girlfriends would rally because they were either in relationships or they weren't quite dating or whatever. And we would be showing them all these people that, look at this guy, look at this guy, look at this guy. And friends that were dating, we were like swapping, we were like looking at, what about this one? So I love that.
Yeah. It was a funny time. It was a wonderful time, actually. She was a wonderful friend. And Wayne popped up on my in page or whatever it was. And it was really interesting. I haven't told this to anyone else, and I haven't actually said it in the book. He was actually seeing another lady, and he said to me, "You sound really interesting, but I've got to be honest, I'm seeing somebody else. But good luck." And I thought, oh gosh, that's a shame because I really liked him. And then 3 months later, he got back in contact with me, and I hadn't found anyone within that time. And he said that relationship didn't work out, or that friendship. Can we meet? And that's how it started. And I'd forgotten that up until this very night. So that's interesting.
Oh, what's really funny is people end up, I don't know what it is. I'm glad I called this the Good Girl Confessional because absolutely without fail, every amazing woman that I speak to on this podcast ends up doing a little confessional. And I think it's because like, and I'm happy, I will confess all myself. So maybe that's what it is. But I think it really is about this kind of really nice thing that women can talk to each other, right? And yeah. And you were not the only person who, like, I met my current partner online. We met on a dating site called Bumble, and we've been together now for 2 years or so, or nearly 2 years. And there's so many dating sites around, but it is really interesting how many people you meet that kind of go, oh, you would have been amazing, but I'm seeing someone, but then that doesn't work out, and then that's how they end. Yeah.
And I actually thought the fact that he said to me, I'm seeing someone else, you sound really interesting, good luck. And then he got back to me 3 months later, and it was, it may have been 4 months later, it was some time. And so I realized that his actions were ethical, that he was a moral person. He wasn't trying to see me at the same time as he was seeing this other woman. And he obviously gave the other thing a chance. And that told me a lot about him even before we started seeing each other.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So he reaches out and says we should meet up. And
we do. He comes to Dubbo for the weekend, and for some reason I decided it was okay for him to come to my house. So
you're a brave lady, Susan.
it sounds really strange, but the house I felt very safe in. Like, looking back, it probably wasn't a good decision. But anyway, I saw him coming through the gate, and I remember looking at him and just thinking, wow, he was just beautiful. He was really, really tall, like
But he's
really.
very tall, isn't he, Wayne? So we talk about Wayne. How tall was Wayne?
I think he was 6'3".
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Really tall.
And I'm guessing, Susan, that you're not particularly tall.
I'm about 5'6.5".
Oh, wow. Then you are tall. I'm like 5'2".
But if photographs of us, honestly, we looked like we were half, I was half of his size.
Of course.
And just the way he was dressed, he had a beautiful blue cotton shirt on that was rolled up at the sleeves, very nice pair of jeans, boots, and the way he walked, he was very confident, beautiful face. And, my heart did skip a beat when I looked at him. I thought, he's gorgeous. And then he came in and we had coffee and we talked. And then he said, would you like to come to dinner with me tonight? He went back to his hotel. We went for dinner that night. And I just remember I was so charmed because he was so confident, talking to the waitress, joking with her, keeping me amused and entertained. It was his confidence, I think, that really won me over that first night.
That's gorgeous. And so, when women say to me all the time, oh, I'm too old, I can't be dating, I'm never going to meet anyone, how am I going to meet anyone at this age? And I'm now 50 and I have friends who are older than that, and in their 60s. And I always say there is someone out there for everyone. I believe that, truly believe that. And your story is, even though it didn't go necessarily the way we would think it would, that it was a love story. It's an actual true love story.
Yeah, it really was. It was the love that I'd been waiting for my whole life. He treated me like no man had ever treated me in my whole life. He really thought I was special, and he really thought I was beautiful. And he would tell me all the time. And back then, I was a lot thinner, and I probably was more beautiful than what I am now. Grief takes a lot away from you. I just always felt when he was with me that I would be cared for and looked after, that he was never frightened of anything. And I've always been the kind of person who doesn't like confrontation, and sometimes I find it difficult to be assertive. I was brought up as a good girl, and having him there as my partner made me feel like anything could happen, and that I was worthy of being loved. It was a real love story. It was everything you kind of ever wish for. And he was larger than life, and I'll never find anyone like that again. Really, I was so lucky.
It's beautiful. And so you two start dating, and honestly, it is quite emotional even for me, because I just recently finished the book, but it is a beautiful love story. How long were you together when the two of you decide that you're going on a huge adventure?
So we were not very long together when he asked me how would I feel about going to live in Spain. And like maybe 4 months or 6 months, it wasn't very long. And I was so surprised because somehow he'd picked it up, or because I don't remember talking about it, that the thing that I love most is traveling and going overseas, and that I would love, I taught in England for a couple of years. I lived in Indonesia for 12 months. So the idea of going somewhere again to live was, that was my dream. And he was the one that brought it up. I wasn't the one that suggested it. He brought it up. And so he turned to me on the couch and he said, how about we spend a year in Spain? Let's just sell everything up and go. And like, I barely took a breath. I just turned to him and said, yes, when are we going? Like, I didn't even have to think about it.
I think that's
And
so beautiful.
It was a combination of knowing that I could trust him and knowing that if we went somewhere together, it would be fine. And also it was time for me to be shifting from Dubbo and doing something different. So it was like everything had come together at the one point in time.
And also too that, you know, as women, like your son is older, he's well and truly independent.
Yes.
And it's kind of a really pivotal moment in a woman's life, I think, you know, to your child is grown up, you find new love, what does that look like? And where does that adventure take you? So I think it's really beautiful. So how did you decide where in Spain you were going to go, and how did all of that happen?
So we knew that we wanted to go somewhere very unfamiliar. It was no good going to England or France, or we wanted to go somewhere where we'd be challenged. We had to sell everything to fund this trip, because to go to somewhere for a year, you have to, or to go to Spain for a year, you have to have enough money in the bank to do it. So we sold the house, we sold the car, we sold the furniture, we sold everything, and scraped together enough money, the amount of money they said that we had to have. But there are only so many countries in Europe that you can do that in. So Spain was one of the countries that we could do that in. It was also cheaper, so we felt we could live there, as opposed to, say, Paris or London.
Paris, London, forget it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
also, I'll throw in there as well, I just really want to make this really clear too, that Wayne worked in the mining industry and that he was well and truly earning money. So I don't want people to be listening to this and thinking, he's met this woman and she sold all of her stuff. It wasn't really like that. It was very much a mutual, he was earning a lot of money as well, and that the two of you decided this is something jointly you could do.
That's exactly right. So we had to have an equal amount of money. And so my money came from my things that I sold, and his money came from his things that he sold. And in fact, when we left, I had nothing left in the bank, no assets, no nothing. He had all his super and savings and things like that. So no, he was a gold miner and certainly earning a lot more money than me. And interestingly enough, now here's something I haven't told anyone else either. He, well, it's funny. Maybe I've told the story so often in the last couple of weeks, I'm beginning little threads. I'm reminding myself. He, within 6 months, maybe less, before we decided to go to Spain, he told me that he wanted to put me in his will as the sole person.
Wow.
I know. And
you're right. I absolutely did not know that.
No, and not many people know that. And that was a very powerful thing. And I remember going to school to my friend and saying, this is what he's saying he wants to do. And it was almost for me a little bit too much. I thought, gosh, because I couldn't do it. I had Jono and, my will's made out to him. But he said, I have no children and I've looked after my family all my life. I want to put you as the beneficiary of my will. So that's just another thing to show, no, it definitely wasn't him about. If anything, people probably thought the opposite.
But I thought that was a really important thing to raise because people who haven't read the book yet and are just listening to this for the first time are probably already thinking, oh, hang on a minute, he's met this woman within months, let's go and live overseas. Yeah. But he was really all about taking care of you, and as you were him as well, Susan. You know, when I read,
I think he gave me solidarity. He gave me his hand in the small of my back. And so I always felt like I was supported. And I think for him, he would say to me that I gave him a new lease on life and gave him fresh perspective and a more youthful, because there was 6 years difference in our age, but I was closer to 50 and he was closer to 60. And I think that's a big difference, as I'm now discovering. It's a big difference in how you feel.
Absolutely. And so before you go overseas, though, you and Wayne got married.
We did. Thank goodness we got married, because that becomes quite important.
Very important. So how did that come about? So at what point did, because it kind of all happened really quickly, didn't it?
It happened very quickly. It all happened in the space of a couple of years. We had a very short courtship and quite a small time together. I'm just adding it up in my head. So we met in 2012 and then things happened in 2015. So 2015 is when we went away, when we travelled overseas.
You were already married by then?
Yeah, so we married in 2014 in Wayne's backyard. He did not want a fancy wedding. He just wanted something not romantic. He just wanted something that made us husband and wife. So we married in his backyard, freezing cold in Orange, because he still had a flat in Orange, with Jono and his girlfriend and Wayne's mother and Wayne's mother's partner. So it was just the 6 of us. And I raced down to the florist that morning and got a big bunch of red roses, and we went for dinner at a restaurant that night.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really.
It was simple, but it's very important if you're going overseas to be married, if you're going to stay for any length of time or anything disastrous is going to happen. I'm just so grateful that we did get married before we went.
And honestly, I'm so grateful for you. Like I'm so like thrilled for you that happened on a number of levels. One, of course, because you were madly in love, and two, because of how your story with Wayne actually played out. So I'm not sure how much of this you really want to talk about, but I would love you to share all of it. So you fall in love, you get married. How amazing! Your son really likes him. All of your friends like Wayne. You've met some of his friends, but not a lot of his friends. But you've clearly met his mum. And then you guys sell everything and go off on this amazing, brilliant adventure to Spain.
Yeah, and what could be better than that, right?
What could be better than that?
No, it was beautiful. It was a dream come true. We lived in this tiny little apartment below the Alhambra Castle in Granada, which I think is the most beautiful city in Spain. So much of North Africa influence, a lot of North African influence, because Granada's in the south part of Spain. Cobbled streets, wonderful people from all around the world, beautiful food, beautiful gin. We walked everywhere, so I lost a lot of weight, and we just spent every day together, just meeting people and learning Spanish and traveling. We traveled because we kept Granada as our base. So it was glorious. It was glorious. It was the best time in my entire life.
And it comes through in the book, like just the joy of, I have thankfully been able to travel a little bit, but I have never ever been to Spain. And I will honestly say, after reading this, I was like, wow, I really need to get my ass to Granada. It is the way that you write about it is so poetic. And I guess, when we go overseas and we fall in love with somewhere, that we always romanticize it. But I think it's more than that, because this was because you shared this moment with the man of your dreams.
Yeah, and really it is a fairy tale city. So anyone who's been to Granada will say it is the most special city. Just the landscape and the old buildings and the people and the food and the language. You can walk, so it's a very small city. It's really more a town, and it's all enclosed in the older area is all enclosed. We could walk it all within one day without an issue. And you have the Romani people sitting on the stone walls and playing flamenco all afternoon, and it just it just comes across through the air. It's amazing city, and we were so happy, and we had no work commitments. We didn't have to be anywhere other than Spanish school, and yeah, it was. I'm so grateful that we had that time, and I will never regret us going, because Wayne had never been overseas before, whereas I'd travelled. No, and I'd travelled extensively. So for him, it was for him, it was probably even better than it was for me, because he'd never been out of Australia other than New Guinea. So, yeah.
And we should say that, actually, because we didn't actually even talk about that. But Wayne was actually brought up in his early life. He was brought up in New Guinea.
He was.
And then came to Australia much later. So, when we say much later, 20-something, in his 20s, wasn't he?
That's exactly right. So he spent maybe a year or two in northern New South Wales at a boarding school when he was in year 11. But he was expelled because I haven't written that in the book either. When you write a book and you've got a lot to say, and so much doesn't end up in the last bit of the story. But I remember he told me that because he loved football, he loved rugby union. He was a big rugby union player, and the boys at the school, it was a Maris Brothers school, and he would always say to me, it wasn't the Maris brothers, it was the Maris fathers that would teach us. And they were very strict, but he was a big boy and very mature looking, and all the other boys would send him into town to get the alcohol because he looked the oldest.
Of course.
And he would play rugby union in his bare feet, because that's the way they played it up in New Guinea, until some other boy took pity on him and gave him a pair of football boots. But in the end, he was expelled from that school for raiding the kitchen and taking some food. Yeah. So back to New Guinea for him. Yeah.
Far out. Okay, so he ends up in Australia much later. So now I can kind of understand even more so, like, why this adventure meant so much to him, and that in sharing this adventure with this woman who he clearly adored you, was so meaningful for both of you. But I think especially the way that you write about him, by the way, is poetic and beautiful. But I think there is something really quite extraordinary in the way that you write, Susan, that when you were talking about that love, it is like it for me, it does take you back to that very first, that most powerful love anyone's ever had.
Yeah.
And you've captured that so beautifully. And when you talk about your mum, we'll get to your gorgeous mother later, but when you talk about your mum in the nursing home, and I think what's really interesting for a lot of women that follow this podcast, that we're all in this kind of age bracket where we are sandwiched somewhere between our children are grown up, but we're now looking after our elderly parents. I lost my mum, nearly 3 years ago. It's kind of like, and it was sudden, but my father actually had Alzheimer's. And so when I was reading your story of sitting in the hospital with your brother, with your mum, your darling mum, I think, like, for me, that just brought up so much stuff, because you have captured these absolute truths about our life, about everyone's life who finds themselves in that situation. And I know we're all very unique. Our parents are unique. Our lives are unique. But in the way that you tell this story, I felt like this was a love story for all. And in talking about your mum in the nursing home, so many people could relate. So many people could relate.
Yeah, I think it's I agree with you about us being at a certain age and our children are more grown up and we're sandwiched between the needs of our parents and the needs of our young adult children, or our friends or our job. Yeah, there's so much that we have to keep balanced on a plate. And so I guess running away with it was like running away with Wayne. Jono was old enough now. He had a girlfriend. He had a good job. I gave up my job and all those responsibilities. And, in some ways it was like that last dash towards something that isn't every day, away from that every day, away from all that balancing. And Wayne really wanted it because he wanted us just to focus on each other. He felt that he'd lived a life of looking after other people, and because he was the eldest son and felt a lot of responsibility, and he said, I just want to run away with the woman I love for 12 months and just focus on us and just live for now.
And how bloody magical is that? Because not many people can actually perceive they would do it or could do it, but so many people dream about it.
Yeah, I think, look, I can't say enough how lucky I feel that we actually did that. I felt a little bit responsible about leaving Mum behind. By that stage, she was in the nursing home. She didn't know me, and that was the one thing that I really worried about. And so I had to make a choice. I did, and I haven't said this to anyone else either or talked about this. I had to make a choice between staying, because at that stage I was in Dubbo and I'd come back and see Mum in the nursing home every fortnight or every month, and it was she was in the Newcastle nursing home, very, very, very long trip. So do I stay or do I go with Wayne for a year? And I made the choice to go with Wayne for a year, which, is maybe not 100% of a great decision, because I thought, gosh, Mum might die while I'm overseas. And Wayne said, well, we'll come back. But after what happened, thank God I went, because Mum didn't end up passing away until 2017. So, and I came back in 2015. So
Wow.
It was the right decision to make.
And look, even like having read the book and, as we've never met face to face, like until now, I feel like for you it was an extraordinarily good decision, and your mum was well cared for. So we should actually point that out as well. She was in a very safe and in a nursing home, and your brother was here.
He was. And we figured it was for 12 months. But after what happened in Portugal, thank God I did that, because I was able to give something to Wayne that otherwise he wouldn't have had. And, it's funny the way things worked out, but Mum was still alive when I came back. It's ironic.
It's so ironic. It really is ironic. All right. So I guess we need to talk about
Yes, I'm sorry, we went off track.
No,
Totally, we went off track.
no, because it's important as well. But I was trying to actually in my head then think about which way will I go down this path. So at some point before you and Wayne go overseas, though, something really interesting happens where he gives you the courage, I suppose, to actually meet your biological
father.
And yes, okay. So how was that moment for you?
I'm
so sorry too, and I'm trying to be really cautious with your feelings here.
Oh no, don't be cautious with my feelings there. There's no need to feel cautious about that anymore. That was many years ago now. That was 2000 and I want to say 13. And I've thoroughly reconciled that. And my father was not a nice man, and he was raising money for the IRA, and he did leave his wife and his other children in Melbourne to run away with my natural mother. And they did stop in Newcastle, and she did have me. And then they continued for another 2 years, and he was involved in criminal activity, and then she eventually left him. So the only reason I felt capable of meeting a man like that was because I had Wayne with me, and I had no worries physically or emotionally that if anything happened, I would be in danger. Yeah. And the meeting itself was hideous, and he was inappropriate in a number of ways. And when we left that pub in Perth, I remember almost dusting my hands off and thinking, thank God that's done. Hopefully I can now leave that behind me.
Was it interesting though? And I know you've written a little bit about this in the book, and so it's fascinating, I guess, and so I'll share something about myself too that not many people, I guess, who listen to the podcast know, but that my mother had an affair when she was married to a man I assumed to be my biological father, and I found out much later he was not.
Oh my God.
And so I never actually found out who my biological father is. But there was this kind of really interesting reckoning. So I was raised by my mum and my stepfather from the time I was 7. My stepfather was on the scene, and he was a beautiful, lovely, incredible man. And I'm forever grateful that I had him in my life. Because the man I assumed to be my biological father was not a very nice man and was quite abusive and not a good person. But when my mum was passing away, and I was there standing with her, and it was all very sudden, it was all happening, and I was with my best friend and my brother. I have siblings, and they were on a plane coming from Perth and unfortunately did not make it in time. But even then I said to my mum, are you going to give him up? Will you tell me who he is? And she wouldn't. She wouldn't budge. No. And so, people are like, really? Even on her deathbed? I'm like, even on her deathbed. There was so much resolve in her. She looked me in the eye and she said, I promised him I wouldn't, and I won't. So there's this kind of moment in time where I realised that was it. Like that time for me is gone. But that is why I think that there's a lot of people going through that who either don't know, as I think you said, your father didn't know who his biological father was.
That's right. And his mother, same story as you. On her deathbed, he's begging with her, tell me who my father was. And she would not tell him.
Yeah.
And which is why my father was so insistent that I go looking for my birth mother and birth father, because he understood how that felt not to know.
Not to know.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that I think that's really hard.
Look, I think it is tough, and at 50 I can reconcile it, you know what I mean? But I found out when I was like 16, when my mother just blurted it out, and in one way I was really relieved that that person was not, that I was my dad. But in another way, it does leave you wondering. And I did recognise that in some ways I was very different from my siblings. And so there is that part of you always that you think, where does that come from?
Yeah.
Where I look at my ex-husband is European, and my daughter very much looks like her European father. And obviously I'm very white. And both of my sons really do take after me. They're very tall. They got their father's height. They didn't get mine. But there's this kind of very strong family resemblance that comes through where they do look like me. And one's got blue eyes and one's got green eyes, and they both have red beards now. And it's interesting, isn't it? That where I look at my children and think, where did that part of you come from?
Yeah,
right?
And it's that idea of wanting to see somebody else who looks like you it's very strong. It's very strong. And Jono doesn't really look like me. But my father, that day in the pub, I could recognise him without even having to be told that he was my father. Yeah. And my mother when I met her.
Which is why I raised that about you being with Wayne and meeting him, because that's the other thing. Even though perhaps that story with your biological father or natural father didn't turn out quite the way you may have hoped, in some ways did you feel like it was a reckoning, at least, that you kind of went, oh, I do look like you. I understand that.
Yeah. And also it's a reckoning because the story, the story of who you are is so important. And he pretty much confirmed everything that my birth mother had said. And so now I knew what was behind me, because not knowing what's behind you makes you feel, it's almost impossible to explain how it makes you feel when you don't know what came behind you. You don't know how you came into the world or why you came into the world. It's not a good feeling. And so just knowing the story made a massive difference to me. Even though maybe the story wasn't great, at least I knew, and it wasn't a vacant spot anymore.
Which is beautiful. And so beyond that, you and Wayne, well, when I say it's beautiful, it's not. It's hard and it's difficult. But having said that, I felt like even when I read the book, there was such a you had reconciled a lot, I think, within yourself by the time you guys get to Spain. Or at the very least, tell me if I'm wrong, at the very least, it's like, yeah, I can leave that behind now. So we're all good. Yeah.
That's more what it was like. It was more like, sorry, I'm just plugging a plug in here so that I don't lose. There we go. It was more like, okay, that's not the best story. That's not the most romantic story. That's not the people that I would have liked to have been born from. But at least I know, and at least I'm not wondering anymore. So let's put that behind us. Let's go to Spain with the man that I love. This is what I'm going to focus on now. I don't have to focus on that anymore. That's what it was like.
Beautiful. So you go to Spain, and then it is romantic and beautiful, and it's, you're in this extraordinarily beautiful setting, drinking gin, eating amazing food, having lots of sex, because you guys are newlyweds as well, right? And but it's more than that. You both met a soul connection, I guess is the best way that I could describe what I read in that book.
Yeah, so I'd always been fascinated by this theory of love by Aristophanes, that we were hermaphrodites. There were 2 heads, 4 arms, 4 legs, each of us facing in the opposite direction, happily cartwheeling around the world. And when we were too happy, the gods split those 2 people apart, and for the rest of our lives we're wandering around trying to find that other person. And if you find that other person, that is love. And if you don't find the other person, that is grief and heartache. And when I told Wayne this theory of love, that this is what love means, or this is where love originated from, he really believed that that was us. And when I look at physical pictures of us together, we've always got our hands on each other. We were always holding hands. He always had his hand in the small of my back. I remember always getting up on tiptoe and hugging him, and we would kiss, and yeah, the sex was amazing because we did come together as one. So physically and spiritually and emotionally, everything, it felt like we were the same person, or what we were able to give to each other made us the same person.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And so the Spanish adventure is extraordinary, but the two of you travel to Portugal.
Which I thought was really weird at the time. I couldn't understand why Wayne was so obsessed with Portugal. You know, we could have gone to Russia. We could have gone, I mean, we went to a lot of places, but we could have gone anywhere. But he wanted to go to Portugal because he was obsessed with this similarity between Spain and Portugal. And I thought, well, why should we go if it's so much the same? But, you know, we promised that we would be open and we would do things for each other. And, you know, I didn't kick up too much of a fuss. And so we went to Portugal, and he hired a car and drove us. I was terrible driving over there.
I'm not sure how I would go either, I'll be honest, like driving on the other side of the road. I've never done it. No.
I don't recommend it. I really don't recommend it. And so he drove us to Portugal, and we had his 60th birthday in Porto, which is the most amazing city. I think other than Prague, that is the city that I loved the most because it was disparate. You know, you had light and dark, you had beauty and you had griminess, and there were people everywhere. I really loved Porto, and that's where we had his 60th birthday up on top of a hill, you know, and it was like I look back at the photos of it, and you know, the sun is setting and we're sitting up on this beautiful terrace, and it was just amazing. And then we drove down to Lisbon for, you know, to go. And so it was his birthday on the 17th of June. And then we got to Lisbon and came the 23rd of June, the morning of the 23rd of June, which was almost a week after his 60th birthday. And we were staying in an apartment in the grimy end of Lisbon because he had booked the apartment and not me. And it was one of those self-catering places. So you had an apartment, but there was no one in the actual building. There were no staff on a reception desk or anything like that. There was a number to get into the apartments, and we were up on the 4th floor, and there was no one else around. Literally, there was no one else around. So do you want me to tell this bit of the story?
Yeah. So are you okay to tell this?
Yeah, I'm fine telling this story. I've told it a number of times. Sometimes I tell it very objectively and I can stand back from it and just tell it as it happened. And sometimes I tell it and I can feel it happening already. Sometimes I tell it and I get very upset. So it's the morning of, I think it's harder when you're seeing somebody face to face than when you're actually doing it.
I just had a thought. So Wayne's birthday was the 17th of June, and I have twin friends, believe it or not, whose birthday is the 18th of June. And my partner is a June baby. So he's a Gemini as well, which actually for the very first time in my head, I think a lot of that makes sense as well, the duality.
And I'm a Gemini as well.
Are you?
Yeah. So my birthday is at the end of May. So my birthdays, I always think the terrible coming of winter. My birthday without Wayne now on the 29th. Our wedding anniversary, which is the 7th of June. His birthday, which is the 17th of June. So we got married in between our birthdays. And then we have the 23rd of June. So it's a terrible time of the year. So I don't recommend doing that. Anyway, so it's the 23rd of June in the morning, and I was sitting on the floor of the apartment, and I was partway through the book, with no understanding of where this book was going. You know, I thought it was just going to be, I thought the book was going to be adoption, because that was a story in itself, and then what it's like to go to Europe as an older couple in love. That's what I thought the story was going to be. But that's not what the story turned out to be. And it's about this time that I actually start writing in the present as things happen, rather than writing from a forward perspective, looking back and retelling what happened. This is about the time I started to tell it as it happened. So I'm going to try really, really hard. So I'm sitting in the apartment typing away, and I can hear the seagulls out the window because Lisbon, we're by the harbour, and I heard this noise. And as I say in the book, my husband wasn't afraid of anything. He was not afraid of anything. And this noise just, I couldn't figure out what it was, and it sounded like fear. And I remember jumping up and running into the bed, and Wayne was just kind of propped up on one arm, purple in the face, unable to breathe. And I remember running to him, patting him on the back, which, you know, was obviously really stupid, and realising at the same time that he was dying, and that if I didn't get help really quickly, this wasn't going to end up great. And I remember saying, the thing I said was, "My God, Wayne." And I raced out into where the phones were and the computers were, and my phone wasn't working. Wouldn't have worked anyway because I didn't have the right SIM card. Wayne's phone was working, but he'd put the code on the phone, and we'd never ever thought to tell each other what our codes were because we were always together. So why would we ever need to tell each other what the code was to get into the phone? And for some reason, I'm tapping on the laptop, trying to find the number for the ambulance, for the emergency service, even though I had no phone to use. And all the time I'm doing this and running around half dressed, Wayne is in the other bedroom, dying. And eventually I realise this isn't going to work, and I race out the door, you know, and there's all these practical things like, how am I going to keep the door open? Will I remember the code to get back into the flat? I knock on the door opposite and no one comes. So I race down the hallway, and then I race back because maybe I should be with Wayne, and I race forward again. And then I hear the door of the flat, the apartment opposite ours, open, and we can't understand each other. I just remember she was dressed in her underwear and we couldn't understand each other, and it was like a farce. And this went on, and I ended up racing downstairs and out into the street and finding someone and miming what was going on. Neither of us knew what street it was, couldn't find a street sign. Somehow we figured out what street we were on. He rang because he knew what the number was. He held the door open for the ambulance people to come. I raced up 4 flights of stairs. Somewhere in between there, I had tried to give Wayne mouth to mouth and it didn't work. Somewhere in between that story. And by the time I got back in there, he'd passed away. And I just sat beside him and held his hand and just could not believe that this was happening.
So sorry, Susan. I'm so sorry, truly. And I don't mean to upset you by talking about all of this, and I can't even begin, and I'm sure that anybody listening to this will not be able to begin unless they've lived it to know or understand what that must feel like, because it is mind-blowing. You're in a foreign country, you don't speak the language, and your life partner is slipping away, and good grief, girl. So, you know, this is what I'm saying. This book is mind-blowing because your story and your journey is mind-blowing. No one expects to go overseas with the love of their life. And
no, but you know, I think the thing that I learned from all this, and the thing that I still find extraordinary, and I say it in the book, if you marry someone or you make a commitment to someone to be their partner, naturally somebody's going to die first. One of you is going to die first. You just don't think about it. You don't talk about it. I mean, there are millions of widows all around the world who have lost their husbands in worse circumstances than me. And yet, I don't know, I just don't know if we don't talk about it, we don't think about it enough. Maybe we're focused on being happy. But I remember afterwards saying to my best friend Di, why didn't I think that this might happen? Why am I so shocked by the fact that he died? He was 60, you know, he's still young, but yeah, it's I don't know. I can't explain it. But certainly I'm not the worst off. People have had it much harder than me, and I think that's really important to remember.
that's true, but I really, you know, that's the thing. I think it's really important, though, that everyone who's listening to this actually understands that you're alone in a foreign country where you don't speak the language. You call your son is getting on a plane and he's literally coming to Portugal. But you have to deal with all of these things that none of us, it's hard enough dealing with these things in our own country, in a place where we feel safe, in a place where your friends are and your family are and we speak the language. If you were doing all of this through, like, by yourself.
I had the woman from the consular. She was wonderful. I couldn't have done it without her. I look back and I'm sure that morning when the apartment was filled with police, 2 lots of ambulances ended up coming. So there were 6 or 7 ambulance officers, there was a doctor, there were police. The people who owned the apartment building somehow turned up. Like the whole place was filled with people in uniforms and officials, and then the woman from the consular turned up. And I remember the doctor turning around to me because they'd called a doctor to pronounce death. And I remember him saying to me, why didn't you do something, something, something? So it was kind of like half English, half Portuguese. And I think he was, because when the ambulance officers arrived, I was just sitting on the bed with Wayne holding his hand. Because I knew it was too late, you know, and I couldn't get him off the bed. My mouth wouldn't fit over his mouth for mouth to mouth. I knew, you know, I knew in my heart and I knew in my head that he was gone. So I had to make a statement to the police about what happened, and I told them what had happened and wrote it in English and someone translated it into Portuguese. But for that whole day, I sat in that apartment with Wayne and they would change that. So they were trying to get approval to take him to the morgue. And so every 3 or 4 hours, there would be a change of police officer. And I was just in the bedroom with Wayne, and every so often a new policeman would come in and then a new policeman would go out. And I think it was the consular woman, the woman from the consulate, who convinced the authorities that this just couldn't go on, you know, for another day or whatever. And finally they allowed the authorities to take him away. You know, so it was extraordinary, but most of the day I was in shock, and, you know, that went all day. But when I think back to it, it seemed like it was maybe only a couple of hours, but obviously it wasn't. So, yeah, it was just, and even if I'd been at home, many people say he would not have survived either because it was a massive heart attack.
And I think that there is some, or I felt like in reading that there was some comfort for you as well, obviously, because, you know, in not knowing. So recently had a friend who lost her partner and he passed away. She woke up and he was gone beside her. But it was the not knowing was really difficult and quite traumatizing. And I think in the finding out finally, this is the cause of death, as traumatic and terrible as it is, it gave her some comfort to know that nothing she could have done.
That's exactly right. And it's that combination of thinking, could I have done more? Should I have done it differently? Because there was somebody at the funeral who suggested that he might have had epilepsy. And if I just moved his tongue out of his mouth faster, he would have survived. So, yeah, the not knowing just adds on top of the guilt that you might not have done the right thing.
The trauma, right, of losing a partner and thinking what could have been different.
Yeah. And so the doctor that I saw when I came back to Australia, she said to me that it's complicated grief. And that's a specific kind of grief that a lot of people experience when it might be shocking. There are other things that complicate the grief. So the complication of us being in a foreign country, the trauma of his actual death and all the confusion around it, and holding on to grief until the funeral, which wasn't until August. You have to hold yourself together. So that complicates your grief. The loss of so much, it wasn't just Wayne that I lost, it was money, it was the job, it was a house, it was all my worldly possessions. So all those things complicate the grief.
And a sense of who you are. If I am not with him, then who am I? What am I?
Absolutely. So, here I was thinking I'd finally found myself. But it was afterwards when I found myself. It was afterwards, not then.
And I honestly, I'm not sure how much of this you've discussed previously or whatever about what transpired beyond that. So you without making it even more traumatic, you had to bring your husband's ashes home. There's a whole lot of rigmarole that goes around transporting somebody's ashes. I did not know that. It never even occurred to me until I read your book. That for me
is occurred to me either.
Whoa. I mean, that for me was quite traumatic and it's really interesting, but it actually raised like a whole lot of things in my head about, and I'm sure a lot of people, if I were to, travel overseas, like I didn't think about it, like you just don't think about it. Traveling overseas with a partner, any partner, but especially as we get older, that these things are important and these are realities that may or may not happen. But as you say, being married is important in these circumstances, and it shouldn't be, but it is, because they need to release the body to you, or his ashes to you. And so Wayne went on a bit of a journey beyond that because you were carrying around his ashes and that you needed to make sure that he goes, that he's going to end up safely home.
Yeah, and suddenly, being Australian became so important to me. Wayne dying, one of the initial things that I received from that is a sense of home and where I really belong. And that is Australia. Getting him home, getting us home, was the most important thing I have ever done. And getting him through that airport in Dubai when I thought they were going to take those ashes away from me.
Yeah.
or open those ashes up in the middle of the airport, and realising that once they opened up that container, we were no longer complying with Portuguese law, and that would mean that I could not get on an Australian plane to take us home. And when he and I, arrived at Sydney Airport, and that wonderful woman at security said, "I don't need to see your paperwork. I just come on through. Welcome home." Honestly, I've never been so relieved in my whole life.
I think in that moment, honestly, I had tears running down my face when I was reading that. I was like, it had been such a journey and such a difficult, as if you hadn't gone through enough. It's like reliving it all over again every time. And, anyway, I don't want to give it all away, but I will say I was so, proud to be Australian in that moment. When you write about that customs guard, when you get off and she just basically says, "Think you've been through enough, love. Off you go."
Yep. She, oh God, you're so right. She was amazing, and she was Australian, and she understood, and her words. Yeah, I thought for a minute she was going to hug me. Her words and her accent and her casualness. I was home, we were home, and, from there on, no matter what happened, I felt that I could handle it.
And handle it you did, my love. Like, honestly, I take my hat off to you. For Wayne, there was still, a journey to come. Thanks to you, because you loved him so much and wanted his final resting place to be extraordinary. And, and I don't want to, I'm not sure I want to give that part of the book away, because I feel like I want people to experience that. And the reasons behind it and the reasons why. So I think, is that fair? Like, I'm not sure how much of this you've talked about elsewhere. I think it's such an extraordinary journey.
I think the last part of the book is very complicated, and sometimes when I speak about it, it doesn't really have the context and the background that's required to talk about it and to use certain words. I have been not forced, but in other interviews, I've had to speak about it, and it just isn't as well explained as what it is when I speak about it in the book, because it is a very complicated issue.
Well, I'm pleased then that I've made that kind of, I had already made a decision that I didn't know how much we could talk about, but part of me didn't really want to give that away. I really hope that people read this book, because I think, for a number of reasons. First of all, because it is a beautiful love story, but also because I think that last part of the story is yours and only yours to tell, not shared with interviewers or me or whatever asking questions. I think it is complicated, and I think that anybody in any relationship will know that nothing is black and white. Lots of shades of grey, right? But regardless of how the ending of the story, it doesn't take away from the fact that it was a beautiful love story.
No, I think that's really important. And the last line of the book, so the last line of the book is the book that makes me cry, the sentence that makes me cry, because I feel the last line in the book, the last couple of sentences, that brings it back to the love story, and that was very, very important for me. This book is my gift to Wayne.
And I think it's a gift to you as well. It's a gift to both of you. It is really a beautiful, beautiful testament to how much love there was between the two of you.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that, because that is what the story is about.
It is. And I think for me personally, at the end, I was so, and you're right, you lived it. So of course you're right. the last few sentences in that book, because as a reader, I don't know where you're going to take me. and that things twist and turn, and then suddenly you're there. And the last couple of lines in the book, actually, you know, I actually had tears. And you know, I read a lot. I read a lot, and I speak to a lot of people, and I don't always get that emotional. But I think this was such a layered story about so many things. You know, the way that you described your relationship with your beautiful son was real and beautiful. The way that you describe your romance and your love for Wayne is amazing. But also, too, I'm going to say this, and it's really important, the way that you talk about your friend Di in this book is so beautiful. And it actually reminds me, like, I'm very lucky to have a very close group of girlfriends that I've grown up with. And I think that in itself, those beautiful, nurtured friendships that women have, that's a love story.
Yeah, and I agree.
The way that you talk about Di, but also your other friend, Liz, that's a love story. It's a love story. And I think that you had this really beautiful way of literally sharing all this love you have and putting it onto a page. It's extraordinary.
That's beautiful. Thank you. That's lovely. That's a lovely summation. I love that. Thank you so much. It's beautiful.
Welcome. And I think I loved that. I loved your relationship with Di through that, and your shared bond and love of Liz. And it's so layered all the way through the book. You have these layered, beautiful relationships, and I think that's really beautiful. And then in the telling, you know, the beautiful relationship you have with your brother and your shared experiences with your parents and with your mum. I think it's difficult to try and explain that in a podcast. So I do hope everyone's going to rush out and buy this book genuinely, because it's so beautiful. And I think it's one of those books too that crept up on me, Susan, because it was kind of like I read it and I couldn't put it down. The first half of the book I read like in no time. And then the last half of the book I found I was like, you know, I didn't want it to end. And I was really worried about where it was going, and I didn't know. And then I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. But it's now, over a number of days after finishing the book, so many things, as you can see, because I'm just doing it in real time here, the whole, you know, me thinking about so many layers of things throughout this book, and especially those relationships that you have woven together. So this is not just a love story about you and Wayne, although at the heart of it, it absolutely is. But I feel like it really is a testament to everyone in your life who supported you through that journey.
Yeah, 100%. You're so right. It's a testament to everyone in my life who's kept me going and loved me, and who I love. That's right. That's really nice. I'd always thought about it as a testament to Wayne, but no, it's definitely a testament to my son, Di, Liz, my brother, my mother. Yeah, thank you. That's a really, really nice way of seeing it.
Oh, well, I'm glad, because that's what came through for me. I think that at the heart of all of this, I really, really felt like, you know, and the readers will get a sense of you. Like, I really felt like I knew you by the end of this. And this person that you started out as completely different from the person who ends the book. And now I think, in being so honoured to actually have this podcast and chat with you in real time, that I can see that is so true, that my belief that who you are now is so radically different from the woman that started that journey. You are strong. You're incredible.
I don't even know what to say to that.
You know what? Because, and in that moment when people read this book, there's the you that started this journey, because there's that gorgeous, you know, oh, I don't know what to do now. I think, you know, because as women, I think we are the sum of many things, are we not?
We are. And I think that, gosh, what do I think? I think that I'm very lucky to have been blessed with many, many people around me who have supported me and loved me. I was very blessed to have Wayne in my life. I Feel so lucky about that. But I'm not so great at, people the last couple of weeks, you're so brave, you're so this, you're so that. It's a really difficult thing to respond to and to, accept, because you just do what you have to do. You just, what was I going to do? I couldn't stay in Grenada. I had to bring Wayne home. Like, you just do what you have to do.
That is very true. But,
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing, isn't it, that through grief and I guess through destruction is that we grow. And I have learned that in my life the hard way myself. But I think that there is such growth, and I think that what you did by finishing this book, by telling this story, and by being so honest about everything, and we touched on, there are some really gorgeous, brilliant moments in this book that we kind of alluded to, but we haven't spoken about. But I think that's kind of, as you said, like, I love that you we're talking about Elizabeth Gilbert. It's so true, right? At what point as women do we stop being shamed, and do we just start owning it and owning our truth and owning our story?
I like that very much, owning our truth and owning our story. That is perhaps what the book is. I've owned my story and I've owned my truth and come out the other side. And yes, I'm still not great at accepting compliments, but I did write a book, didn't I? That's pretty amazing.
You wrote a book. You wrote a book. Yeah. And I think that while everybody thinks, I'd really like to write my story, I'll write that one day, the reality is that not many of us do. And that you've written not just a book, Susan, but you've written a really beautiful book, and one that is heartfelt and it's moving and brilliant, and it is a love story. But I, as I said to you before, I'm going to walk away and believe it was a love story, not just for you and Wayne, but it's, you have somehow woven so many love stories into this book, which is kind of really beautiful. So I'm sure that your friend Di and your son and your brother and many people will be so extraordinarily proud of you. I hope they listen to the podcast, because they will get to hear what you've so beautifully woven into these pages, which is a love for all of them and an extraordinary love for the man that you lost. And for that, I'm truly sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. A man that I lost, but a man that gave me so much. So just thankful for the time that we had, because not everyone has that time.
Very true.
And Di will definitely listen to the podcast. I have to tell her absolutely every single thing I do. So she
I have those girlfriends in my life, and I love it. So when I'm reading Di, and I'm like, oh, when my friends read this book, they're my Di. They're my Di's, my Liz's. and it's beautiful. So I'm grateful that you had that kind of support in your life, because good grief, that's it's a lot to go through, Susan. It really is.
Yeah, and she stood behind me the whole entire way, as has my brother and my son. So I'm very, very lucky.
Yeah, you are. But they're lucky too. They're lucky too. And, there's this expression that if you fall in love with a writer, you'll never, ever be forgotten. Is that how it goes? I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
But it's true, right? And I think that this is the most beautiful part, that unfortunately, while you lost Wayne too soon, he will never, ever be forgotten, because he is here, and it's so raw and so beautiful. He is equally as lucky as you are. And I think that that's what comes out of the story for me.
Thank you. I really appreciate your words. You've been very, very kind, and I can tell that you've read the book very well. And,
very well.
Yeah, I'm really grateful. I'm really, really grateful.
No, I'm grateful. Sorry?
Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. And I didn't want you to come on here if I hadn't read the book. I think it was really important, and I'm so glad that I did. And it's such a beautiful book. I feel like, you know, anyone who gets it is going to be blessed, especially women our age. They'll totally get it. It is a really moving and beautiful testament. And I honestly don't think this will be your last book, Susan. I just don't. I think that you're an extraordinary writer. I know that you're working on something. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct. 50,000 words I've written. So that's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good. Just not a lot of opportunity in the last 3 months or so, but I will get back to it.
You will, but you know, there's some important stuff going on here right now as well. I love this book. I'm so incredibly grateful that you would give me your time and come on the podcast and share your extraordinary story, which I know is going to resonate with a lot of women, you know, who are 50 and over, and even my girlfriend who lost her partner, who is much younger even than I, that, you know, to know that we are not alone in the world, I think is an important thing. And I think that you have told such a beautiful, beautiful story. And I will say there were moments when I was reading this on the train, on public transport here in Melbourne. A couple of moments where you know what I'm talking about, where I laughed out loud and went, "Oh shit! Okay, it must be."
Yep.
Brilliant.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and yeah, I was hoping maybe that the public health system might give me some kind of what do they call it, sponsorship to talk about it.
But they haven't.
But they haven't. No, they haven't. It's a thing. Like, it's a real thing, and I'm not the only woman of 50 plus years, and it just makes it worse because you've gotten through all these years without it, and then you get it, you know, in your mid-50s. So unfair.
People are listening and thinking, what has she got? I was like,
you're going to have to read the book to find out.
You're going to have to read the book to find out. That is true. But even though the public health system will not sponsor you, at least we have Jim.
Chin chin.
It's been absolutely beautiful talking to you. I am so thrilled to meet you. I feel like you're everything I thought you were going to be. You're brilliant.
I'm really glad. I'd hate to be not who I am. Thank God, that would be awful. And you've been amazing and so easy to talk to. And I'm thankful for the time that you've given me. You didn't make me say anything I didn't want to say. And I've said some things that actually feel really good that I said them. So thank you. Am I allowed to say your name on the podcast or not?
Absolutely. Yes, Sandy. Yes, you can.
I wasn't sure. So I was trying to be.
And you're right. Like, well, we were all raised to be good girls. You know, that's the whole point of the name, the Good Girl Confessional. I think it's a song. You know, we're all raised that we're supposed to be that kind of person, and the reality of most women is, especially at this age, is we are not.
That's exactly right. Di and I talk about this all the time. Finally, we're no longer, you know, doing what's expected. So, Sandy, it wasn't some odd privacy thing that I had to step around. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'm going to send my love to you and to Di. I love your friendship, and to your beautiful son, Jono, for being such an integral part of this book. And I know that I can't even begin to imagine. I'm saying I know, I don't know. I can't imagine the effort it would have taken, the emotional energy to actually put all of this on paper. It is extraordinary how beautiful to have shared a love story such as yours.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I hope one day when I'm in Newcastle, you and Di will take me out on the town.
We absolutely will. There's an excellent Spanish restaurant in Newcastle where they serve excellent tapas and excellent gin. Yeah.
Excellent.
So you're right.
Yeah. You had me at gin, so we'll definitely. I can't wait. I am so grateful that you wrote this book. I'm so grateful that you shared your story, and especially I'm really honoured that you came on the Good Girl Confessional and shared it with me, because to hear it in your own words is so, like, it's profoundly. If I couldn't believe it would be better, but it is even better than hearing it in the book. But everyone needs to go out and read this book. And congratulations on such an extraordinary piece of work. And I'm going to send you so much love.
Thank you. Sending it all back.
I feel like we're going to be friends. And I
think that's a nice idea. Thank you. That's lovely.
All right, my love. Thank you so much. And you have a wonderful, wonderful night. And I hope the rest of the book tour goes incredibly well for you. It's sure it's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to your quality podcasts. We chat to really interesting women telling their amazing stories, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for all of your support. Bye for now.